Hey everybody, good to see you. Phil here. Today I have a little treat for you. I just released a course called Simplifying Solvers, in which I talk about my framework for studying solvers, which is a lot faster than the way most people do it, and I think quite a bit better. Today I'm going to give you a sneak peek. So without further ado, let's do some solver work. Hey everybody. Throughout this course, I have used a phrase, pull heuristics from your solver study. And some of you may be thinking, what is Phil talking about? What are these heuristics that I'm supposed to pull? So while there have been some that I mentioned as I've done the solver study, I want to give you some concrete examples so that you know exactly what I mean. And so you'll understand how to pull them yourself when you are studying, and you'll learn a few today if you didn't already know them. So I'm going to go into GTO Wizard and show you some of these in practice. So in this first example, we have a king 5-4 flop after a button raise and a big blind call. And I'm just going to show you check. We'll use whatever the normal sizing is here. Small and call. And then I'll bring in a offsuit jack turn. Check. And what you'll see here is a lot of overbetting, right? A lot of 125 to 175% pot. And when you look at these overbets, even with this very large sizing, 175% pot, you'll see hands like king queen in there. And king queen is not a hand that can go for 3 streets of value on this board if you're betting 175% pot on the turn. What happens is, when you bet 175% pot on the turn, you're narrowing your opponent's range in such a way that, unless you're going to river a king or a queen, I'm assuming, and we can check this, you're not going to be able to get value again. So why does the solver do this? In no limit, obviously this doesn't apply in PLO. In no limit, this is the heuristic. Optimal strategy often involves, when you have a wide overbet range, including a lot of one street, or really second street, because this is the turn after you see bet small on the flop, value hands now. Whereas in a lot of other spots, turn bets can be more oriented towards hands that can very often get another street of value on the river. And if you have a decent / good hand, you might pot control and get your one street later. In PLO, you're very often going to do that. In a lot of no-limit spots, you do that. But solvers have shown us that on a lot of these boards, no, you also do this. And so king-queen is definitely betting a lot of 125% pot, as well as some 175. So let's just show you what happens on the river, and then I'll explain my interpretation, the heuristic I pulled from solvers, as to why this happens. So we'll grab a semi-brick river, check. And as you can see here, king queen is not betting. It looks like there's a tiny sliver of, tiny sliver of a bet. So it actually gets kind of close to betting up to 60% pot, or actually up to 83% pot, but it doesn't do it. It's a little bit too thin. It's earning more EV by checking by just a little bit. So it's closer than I thought, but it is thin. So I was right that it's going for one street on the turn. And the reason for that is, on these dynamic boards, when you check back turn, you are very often going to need to bet smaller on the river. Like, your range is going to want to bet something like 2/3 pot on the river. So you're going to get less value with king queen offsuit that way. And the alternative to that is, do we size down with king queen? Can we bet 2/3 on the turn and 2/3 on the river and narrow our opponent's range only so much that we're still getting value? And the answer is yes, but that's not preferable, because on the turn, we have so much equity that making this big overbet now is good, but on so many rivers, it's going to get dicier. So on the turn, we make this big bet. We're protected by the nuts in our range. So we can't just, it's not like our overbets are all king queen and we get wrecked by raises. We have some really, really strong hands, top set, middle set, and so on here. So we're protected, and we get that one street when the board is very clean and we know we're pushing a lot of equity. Whereas if we were to bet 2/3 on the turn and then 2/3 on a offsuit 7 river or on a 10 of hearts river, there are a lot of rivers on which we're not actually excited to get that bet in and can't, or that the bet becomes a lot thinner, and we open ourselves up to more check raises from a range of value and bluffs. So the heuristic is just turnover bets in spots like this with strong one pair hands. That's the heuristic that you pull. I just explained the why. So the heuristic, the simplest heuristic to pull from this is turnover bets with strong one pair hands, are very common in no limit hold'em to bet flop, large overbet turn, and check river on essentially every river. So let's find another example of a heuristic. So let's take the same board. Flop goes check, check. Turn goes check, check. And we are on the river. So first I want to check and I want to look at in positions bluffs. And what you'll notice is in positions barely bluffing ace high or a low pair, but always bluffing with worse than ace high. The heuristic here, the first heuristic, is in position when the pot's been checked down, and in some other spots, but essentially when the hand's been played in such a way that neither player necessarily has strong showdown value, like either could have iffy showdown value, in position chooses bluffs from the bottom of its range rather than the best blockers. So for example, let's see, 10-8 of spades on this board, it's terrible blockers, but it's bottom of range. And so in position is bluffing with it. Whereas ace 9 here with the ace of hearts, or the 9 of hearts for that matter, they look like much better blockers. Now, you're not often checking back the nut flush draw on the flop and then the nut flush on the turn, but still you block some of your opponent's check raises. And the ace blocks wheels and kind of interacts with some of your value range. You might have some wheels here. So you would think, well, you might think if you're going blocker centric that you would choose a hand like this, but in position you don't go blocker centric in check down pots or in these other spots where ranges are very wide. You just go with bottom of range. So looking at out of positions bluffing range, this actually is a more pronounced effect in PLO than it is in no limit, probably because in PLO you turn a lot of pairs into bluffs because pairs are low in the range. But you can see, sometimes with 9-6, which is the absolute bottom of range, you're not bluffing. And with ace high, sometimes you are bluffing. And so it's, ace high with an ace blocker with a 7 of hearts blocker is more impactful blocker hand. Same with ace 6 for similar reasons. So the heuristic is in position is more bottom of range for bluffs. Again, only in these wide range spots. This is not true in every situation in poker. And then out of position in these same spots is bluffs more blocker centric. So that's another heuristic for you. So for the last one, we'll touch on something I've talked about earlier, and we'll use this same board. So this time let's have the button bet, the big blind call, that same jack of hearts turn, we'll have a check. So we'll have the button bet half pot, and we'll have out of position raise pot, and the button's going to call. Now river can be an offsuit deuce. So now let's have the big blind check and face 84% pots, the closest to pot, just because that's easier math. You'll notice that the big blind's folding 90% of the time. So I've talked in the course about exceptions to the minimum defense frequency rule, exceptions to 1 minus alpha. This is one of those exceptions. So why would we fold 90% of the time? Doesn't that mean that our opponent gets to bluff with everything in this spot? And so just to compare, if the big blind instead bet 84% pot, we're going to see a more normal defense range. Right? We're going to see 47% folds, which is just barely over 1 minus alpha if the quick math in my head is right, but blocker effects make it minimum defense approved. So why is it so different that when we check and we face this same size, we massively overfold? So for the answer, there are two ways to look at this. The first is kind of the more intuitive way. As out of position, we check potted this turn. We polarized a ton. We said we've got a flush, essentially, or we don't, and we're bluffing. And so if we look at our range after checking here, we've got, well, actually, let's look at our range before checking. 36% flushes, 2 pair plus is still betting. So 2 pair plus is betting. And if we check, we've got, basically note that this random top pair, second pair. We got a lot of third pair bluffs. We got a ton of ace high bluffs and ton of no made hand bluffs. So intuitively, it kind of makes sense that once we polarized, we don't have bluff catchers anymore. That's one explanation of the same thing. Now, another way to explain it is with incentives, the eye and brain. What we're doing when we're overfolding massively is, in most cases, when we're overfolding massively, we're incentivizing our opponent to overbluff. We're incentivizing them to exploit us by bluffing a lot. However, in this situation, there are no incentives for our opponent to take advantage of when we fold 90% of the time. First of all, they're bluffs most of the time. First of all, they're bluffing all of their bluffs already, right? So no made hand is already bluffing always, and ace high is usually bluffing. And when it doesn't, and when these other hands don't, they're usually the best hand anyway. So they can't expand their range to, bluff all, and they only have 4%, 0.5%, 3%, 1%. They barely have these hands. They can't expand their range to bluff top pair to take advantage of our massive overfold, because all of our folds lose to top pair anyways. So you might say, well, wait, now, but they have incentive now to float this check raise with more potential bluffs because they're going to get such a profitable bluff on the river whenever you check. But that's not exactly how it works, because they had to call a pot size raise and they had to avoid us betting. So after we check raise the turn, we're only checking 41.3% of the time. So most of the time when they call that pot size raise, almost 60% of the time, we're not going to check. We're not going to give them the opportunity to bluff. So it's not exploitable by floating the turn, and it's not exploitable by adding bluffs on the river, because those bluff hands that they could add already win the pot when they check. So the heuristic to pull here is, once you polarize and then check the river, you way overfold according to 1 minus alpha. I hope that these heuristics give you an idea of the types of things that I want you to be learning when you study with solvers. And I hope the examples and the whys were interesting to you. I like nerding out a little bit. And I'll see you in the next video. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. Now's the obligatory plug. If you're interested in learning more about the course, you can head to runitonce.com, or you can ask questions here in the comment section, and I will do my best to get back to you. Until next time, take care and good luck.